For centuries, the Ural Mountains have stood as Russia's spine, the great geological wall dividing Europe from Asia, separating the civilized heartland from the frozen wilderness beyond. Russian generals had leaned on this geography like a crutch, convinced that distance alone was armor enough, that the sheer immensity of their landmass was an unconquerable fortress. They moved their most precious aircraft east, past the Urals, into the deep cold of Chelyabinsk Oblast, and told themselves the war could not follow. They were wrong. On the night of April 25th, 2026, the war followed. It flew 1,100 kilometers through the dark, skimmed the treetops at the edge of radar detection, and descended without mercy onto the aprons of Shagal Air Base. And Russia's greatest military myth died in the flames. The evacuation had seemed logical, even brilliant at the time. Ukraine's long-range strikes had been creeping steadily deeper into Russian territory for months, targeting strategic bases with growing precision and growing audacity. The attacks on Chelyabinsk, where Russia's rarest Su-57 Felon stealth fighters had been stationed, sent panic rippling through the corridors of the Russian command. These were not replaceable machines. Each Su-57 represented between $100 and $120 million of engineering ambition. Russia's answer to American fifth-generation dominance, its export showpiece, its technological pride, with production strangled by Western microchip sanctions, with the total operational fleet hovering somewhere below 30 aircraft. Losing even one was unthinkable. So the order came down: move them. Move everything valuable. Get them behind the Urals. Get them somewhere safe. The convoys moved at night. Military cargo trains ran blacked out. Trucks carrying disassembled components rolled under cover of darkness. Transfer flights were conducted under radio silence. The Russian military machine executed this massive, complex logistical operation with what it believed was absolute secrecy, what it did not. No, what its intelligence apparatus either failed to discover or was too afraid to report upward through the chain of command, was that Ukraine was watching every move, every rail route, every cargo manifest, every tail number as it touched down on Shagal's frozen apron. Ukrainian cyber intelligence units had decoded the unusual patterns on Russian railway networks weeks before the first aircraft moved. Deep cover partisans on the ground fed encrypted confirmation in real time. Satellite telemetry filled in the gaps. By the time Russia considered its prized fleet safely hidden, Shagal Air Base was already marked on Ukrainian strike boards. The hunters had simply been waiting for the prey to settle. Then came the drones. Not the crude, improvised weapons of the war's early days. These were something categorically different. The Lyuty, the Bober, and the newest generation autonomous strike systems that Ukraine's underground engineering facilities had been producing at a pace that stunned Western military analysts. Carrying warheads of roughly 100 kilograms, these machines were not remotely piloted devices dependent on GPS links that Russian electronic warfare could sever. They were autonomous predators, equipped with AI-driven optical terrain recognition systems that needed no satellite connection to find their targets. They read the Earth itself, its contours, its landmarks, its geometry, and navigated with mechanical certainty through the thousands of kilometers of hostile airspace between Ukraine's borders and Russia's supposed sanctuary. Russia had spent billions of rubles on electronic warfare systems, designed to blind exactly these kinds of weapons. The drones flew straight through them, seeing nothing but their targets, guided by algorithms that no jammer could touch. For more than 10 hours they flew, hugging the terrain, invisible to radar, indistinguishable from the frozen landscape below. They crossed rivers. They crossed forests. They crossed the Urals themselves, those ancient mountains that Russian generals had worshipped as natural protection, and descended into the Chelyabinsk basin as the last hours of darkness thinned toward dawn. On Shagal's aprons, parked in neat rows that must have seemed so orderly, so secure, so utterly beyond reach, sat the crown jewels of Russian aviation. The Su-57s with their N-036 Bielka ESA radars and laser countermeasures, the Su-34 fullbacks, those flying tanks, each capable of carrying 8 tons of ordnance, the aircraft that had been pounding Ukrainian defensive lines with 3-ton glide bombs day after relentless day. They sat there in the dark, cold, and still, waiting for a morning that would never come as planned. The drones climbed in their terminal phase, ascending sharply from their low-altitude flight paths, and dove onto their targets at killing angles. The explosions that followed were not metaphorical. They were real, violent, and catastrophically expensive. 4 aircraft took direct hits. The damage was severe enough that Moscow dispatched specialized aviation engineers and damage assessment teams from the capital because the local maintenance infrastructure at this deep rear base had never been designed for this, had never imagined it would need to be. Tractors dragged the wrecked aircraft to distant corners of the apron in desperate attempts to hide them from Ukrainian satellites that were already overhead, already photographing, already documenting every burned panel and shattered airframe for the world to see. The Ukrainian General Staff announced the results on May 1st, 2026. Commander Robert Magwar-Brovdy named the losses publicly, mockingly, with the calm confidence of a man who had just proven something that could never be unproven. The world's first official drone army had reached into the heart of Russia and taken what it came for. What died at Shagal was not merely metal and avionics. What died was the doctrine, the assumption that geography protects the powerful, the belief that moving assets beyond a certain distance creates safety, the comfort, that a nuclear superpower's rear echelon is, by definition, inviolable. Russia's generals had built their entire psychological architecture on the myth of the untouchable homeland. That architecture now lay in pieces on a frozen airfield in the Urals, photographed by satellites, catalogued by enemy intelligence, announced to the world by a commander who could not quite keep the satisfaction from his voice. The mountains did not save them. Nothing saved them. Because the new weapons do not respect distance, do not fear electronic jamming, do not tire over 10 hours of flight, and do not negotiate with geography. They simply find the target, and they kill it, wherever it hides.